In a city drowned in neon and rain, shadows have begun to move on their own. People whisper of figures without bodies, reflections that strike, steal, and kill while their owners sleep. Detective Elias Cade thought he was chasing a criminal. But the deeper he goes, the more he realizes the real enemy isn't in the dark streets, it's the darkness following him. This is the city where the shadows walked without their bodies, where fear has no face, and light can't be trusted anymore. The city sprawled beneath a sky choked with neon and smog, its towering monoliths bleeding light into the perpetual dusk. Rain slicked the streets, reflecting fractured signs in hues of electric blue and sickly green. Elias Cade stood at the edge of an alleyway, his breath misting in the chill air as the distant hum of hover cars faded into a low, ominous drone. Here, in this forgotten corner of the megacity, fear had taken a new shape, one without flesh or bone. He crouched beside the trembling victim, a man barely conscious, eyes wide and darting toward shadows that flickered unnaturally along the cracked concrete walls. "I swear it wasn't a man," the victim whispered hoarsely, "just darkness moving on its own." Elias's gaze followed the victim's frantic eyes. The shadow detached from a nearby street lamp, pulsing and twitching, as if alive. Without a body to anchor it, the shadow lunged, striking with swift brutality. Yet when Elias turned, there was nothing but empty space. No figure, no attacker, only the cold, unyielding night. The phenomenon was spreading. Reports flooded the precinct, shops robbed by shadows, assaults with invisible hands, chaos unchecked by conventional law enforcement. It was a nightmare made real, a violation of natural order that left the city trembling. At precinct headquarters, Captain Rourke's gruff voice cut through the murmur of officers. "This isn't just another gang war," he said, slamming a dossier on the table. "These shadows are turning the city inside out. We need a special unit, and Cade, you leading it." Elias nodded, a mixture of resolve and unease tightening in his chest. The shadows were not just criminals, they were something else, something beyond understanding. And now, they had his attention. Later, atop a rain-slicked rooftop, Elias studied his own shadow. It stretched long and thin, edges flickering like a candle's flame caught in a draught. For a moment it seemed to hesitate, to twitch with an intelligence of its own. A chill ran down his spine. "What are you hiding?" he whispered to the darkness at his feet. From the depths of the city, a hooded figure approached Juno, a street informant known for navigating the city's hidden currents. Her voice was low, urgent. "They're not random," she said. "There's a pattern. Someone's pulling strings. The Umbra Network. You need to watch your back." Elias felt the weight of those words settle like a stone. The shadows were out there, moving with purpose, and so was the corruption that bred them. The night deepened, neon signs flickering like dying embers. Somewhere in the darkness, a shadow moved without a body, untouchable, unstoppable. And Elias Cade, detective of a city unraveling at the edges, was just beginning to understand the nightmare he faced. But as he turned to leave, his own shadow twisted oddly beneath him, a silent harbinger of the horrors yet to come. The precinct office was a cramped cage of buzzing electronics and flickering screens, a sanctuary for the desperate and determined. Elias Cade sat slouched behind a battered desk, the worn wood scarred by years of restless hands and restless minds. Neon light from the city outside cast long, wavering shadows through cracked blinds, the colors bleeding into the stale air like a slow, toxic rain. Across from him, Mira Voss leaned over a holographic projection that shimmered with the pulse of recent shadow attacks. Her short, cropped hair caught the glow of the displays, sharp angles framing eyes that seemed to pierce the digital veil. The map beneath their fingers flickered erratically, red markers flashing like the city's heartbeat, erratic, violent, alive. "These aren't isolated incidents," Mira said, voice low but steady. "Look at this cluster here downtown, the industrial sector, the old transit lines. The shadows are striking in patterns. It's too deliberate to be chaos." Elias rubbed his temple, the exhaustion etched deep into the lines around his eyes. "Patterns or puppets? Are we looking at some kind of shadow puppeteer? She nodded, her gaze never leaving the shifting data streams. Exactly. Someone or something is pulling strings. The room seemed to close in around them, the hum of outdated computers blending with the distant rumble of the megacity beyond. Outside, the rain tapped relentlessly against cracked windows, a metronome for the city's restless pulse. Elias's eyes flicked to the corner of the room, where a cracked monitor displayed a live feed of the streets, a shadow detached and hovering near an alleyway, flickering like a flame caught in the wind. How do you hack shadows? Elias muttered, more to himself than Mira. Not the shadows themselves, she said, clicking swiftly through layers of encrypted files. But the signals, the disturbances they leave behind. Umbra's encryptions are tight, but every system leaks. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, peeling back layers of digital smoke to reveal intercepted transmissions, cryptic bursts of data that hinted at coordination. A network beneath the network. Elias's heart thudded unevenly as the pieces began to align. So the Umbra network isn't just a rumor, he said grimly. They're real. Mira exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing, and they were orchestrating this nightmare. The concept was surreal shadows, long thought to be mere appendages of their owners, acting with will, intent, and now direction. Elias's methodical mind strained against the intangible horror. The city was not only unraveling but doing so under the hand of an unseen enemy, one that defied logic yet wielded power like a blade. Later, Elias stood by the rain-streaked window of the precinct. The city sprawled beneath him in a labyrinth of glowing veins and shadowed corners. His own shadow stretched along the concrete, twitching, hesitating, an erratic pulse in the familiar. A cold knot tightened in his gut. Mira's voice broke through the silence. You can't fight this like a normal case, Elias. Shadows aren't just enemies. They're refractured reflections of ourselves, of the city's pain. He turned to face her, the weight of his exhaustion and fear etched into every line of his face. And what if the reflection is a monster? Then we have to understand it, she said softly, before it consumes us all. The partnership between the detective and the hacker deepened, a fragile alliance forged in the crucible of creeping darkness. Each revelation pulled Elias further from his rigid certainty into a world where light and shadow bled into one another, where control was an illusion and identity a fragile construct. As the night thickened around them, the city whispered its secrets in echoes and shadows, and Elias knew they were only just beginning to listen. But the shadows were already listening back. The megacity's underbelly was a labyrinth of flickering neon and choking fog, a place where the light fought to survive against the ever-encroaching darkness. Elias Cade's footsteps echoed hollowly against the cracked pavement, the worn sole of his boot catching on a loose shard of metal. Beside him, Mira Voss moved with a practiced ease, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting them to bite. The air was thick with the scent of burnt ozone and stale smoke, a pervasive reminder of the city's decay. Juno says the Umbra network spread is worse than we thought, Mira murmured, her voice low but urgent. She adjusted the strap of her worn leather satchel, the one packed with gadgets and hacking tools. They were not just pulling strings, they were puppeteers in the dark. Elias nodded, his gaze flickering to the lengthening shadow at his feet. Something was off. The silhouette beneath the dim glow of the flickering street lamps quivered, twitching with an unnatural jitter. He blinked, rubbing his tired eyes, but the shadow lingered a moment too long, folding inward like a living thing reluctant to obey. You seeing this? He whispered. Mira followed his gaze. Yeah, that's not normal. Shadows don't spasm unless there's a disturbance. The city groaned around them, the distant wail of sirens weaving through the night. They pressed forward, the sense of unease thickening with every step. The neon haze gave way to narrower alleys, walls slick with grime and graffiti etched in hurried scrawls. Here, the city's pulse slowed, and the weight of its secrets pressed in. A figure detached itself from the gloom ahead, a lean silhouette wrapped in a threadbare jacket, eyes sharp and darting like a cornered animal. Juno. The informant's presence was as much a fixture of the underground as the rusted dumpsters and broken streetlights. You relate, Juno hissed, glancing over her shoulder before locking eyes with Elias. Things are shifting. Shadows aren't just running wild anymore. Someone's pulling the strings, making them dance. Elias exchanged a look with Mira, Umbra Network. Juno nodded grimly. They re not just rumors anymore. They've got eyes everywhere. Watch your back. The words hung between them, heavy and foreboding. Elias felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, a primal warning. His shadow writhed again, slipping closer to the cracks between the concrete. Their investigation led them to the outskirts of the abandoned industrial district, where skeletal factories loomed like ghosts against the night sky. The air here was colder, thicker with the scent of oil and rust. Inside one derelict building, the darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Suddenly, a ripple shifted along the wall, an absence of light that warped and coiled. A shadow detached itself, fluid and malevolent, its form twisting in impossible angles. Elias's heart hammered as the creature lunged, a dark tendril seeking flesh. Mira shouted a warning, and they barely scrambled to safety, the echo of their fleeing footsteps swallowed by the cavernous emptiness. The rogue shadow's hiss lingered in the air, a sinister promise. Back outside, Elias leaned against the cold brick, trying to steady his breath. The line between hunter and hunted blurred as his own shadow twitched and quivered at his feet. No longer the obedient twin, but a wild thing with its own agenda. This isn't just a case anymore, Elias muttered, eyes scanning the blackness. It's a war one where even I don't know which side I'm on. Mira's hand on his shoulder was steady, a fragile anchor in the swirling chaos. Then we fight, she said firmly. Together. But Elias knew the truth was darker. The city's shadows were fracturing, and so was he. Somewhere beneath the neon glow and fractured reflections, the truth waiting to consume them all. As they vanished into the night, Elias's shadow stretched long behind him, twitching with a life that no longer answered to its owner. The city's neon veins pulsed with a sickly glow as Elias, Cade, and Mira Voss made their way through the labyrinthine alleyways leading to the fringes of the industrial district. The haze hung thick, a toxic mist infused with the ever-present hum of machinery and distant sirens, a symphony of decay and control. Here, in the shadowed heart of the megacity, secrets festered like open wounds. Elias's trench coat billowed behind him as he pushed past a rusted gate into a narrow courtyard cluttered with discarded tech and flickering street lamps struggling against the gloom. Mira's footsteps were light but purposeful alongside him, her piercing gaze scanning the holographic readouts flickering on her wrist console. "This is it," she murmured, voice low but steady, Huxley's lab. The door creaked open, revealing a cramped, space-packed floor to ceiling with an unsettling array of devices, arcane scientific instruments melded with cutting-edge technology. Holographic displays shimmered with streams of data, some flickering erratically as if resisting comprehension. The air hummed with static, charged with a latent energy that prickled Elias's skin. Dreh. Leonard Huxley emerged from the shadows, his disheveled hair a wild tangle, eyes gleaming with manic intensity behind thick spectacles. Clad in a stained lab coat, he clutched a strange device, a compact apparatus pulsating with a nebulous dark energy that seemed to twist the very light around it. "Detective Cade, Mies Voss," Huxley greeted, voice rasping but eager. "I've been expecting you." Elias studied the man carefully. There was brilliance in the scientist's chaotic aura, but also something more, a flicker of madness or perhaps desperation. "Drah. Huxley," Elias said, voice gravelly, "we need answers. Shadows are unbound, raking havoc, and the Umbra Network's fingerprints are all over this." Huxley nodded, eyes darting to the device in his hands. "Yes, the shadows, they were not merely detaching, they were being manipulated, controlled. Umbra has found a way to exploit the very essence of human identity, severing the bond between self and shadow for their own ends. Mira stepped forward, her expression sharp. "And you retelling us this because—" The scientist's gaze flickered with something unreadable. "Because I seek to understand, to control the uncontrollable. But the cost is unimaginable. Umbra's corruption runs deep, intertwining with the city's elite, their greed feeding the Shadow Rebellion." Elias clenched his fists. "So, what? They weaponize shadows to destabilize society, keep the population in fear and chaos." "Precisely," Huxley whispered. "But the shadows have a will of their own. We are tampering with forces beyond comprehension." The conversation twisted between revelation and ambiguity, Huxley's cryptic warnings sowing seeds of suspicion in Elias's mind. Was the scientist a genuine ally or another piece in Umbra's sprawling game? Meanwhile, Mira's fingers danced across a concealed terminal near the lab's rear wall. Her eyes narrowed as encrypted Umbra communications spilled across her screen, messages coded with ruthless efficiency, detailing internal power struggles and protocols for shadow manipulation. The network was fracturing, but its grip on the city tightened still. "Elias," she said softly, "this goes beyond shadow attacks. Umbra is orchestrating a full-scale rebellion, turning the city's own darkness against itself." Outside, the city throbbed with a restless energy. The neon glow fractured by drifting fog, shadows stretching and twisting like living things. Elias stepped into the street, the oppressive weight of the revelation pressing down on him. The line between light and dark, control and chaos, ally and enemy had never seemed so perilously thin. He glanced down at his own shadow, flickering unsettled at his feet, a reminder of the fragile bond he was desperate to reclaim. The Umbra's veil had been pierced, but the true darkness was yet to come. "We're not just fighting shadows," Elias muttered. "We were fighting the city itself." A low rumble echoed through the streets, a warning, a call to arms, or perhaps the first breath of the nightmare yet to unfold. The investigation had deepened into a web of deceit and power, and Elias knew that every step forward risked pulling him further into the abyss. But turning back was no longer an option. The shadows were watching, waiting, and the Umbra network's grip was tightening. Outside the flickering holo signs, the city seemed to hold its breath, the neon lights casting fractured reflections on rain-slicked pavement. Elias steeled himself. The hunt was far from over, and the shadows were no longer just fleeing, they were hunting. "We need to move quickly," Mira said, her voice steady despite the storm of revelations. "Umbra won't wait for us to catch up." Elias nodded, eyes scanning the horizon where the glow of the city's heart met the encroaching darkness. Their enemy was invisible, omnipresent, and merciless. The line between man and shadow was blurring, and the cost of control was growing ever higher. As they disappeared into the labyrinth of alleys, the city swallowed them whole, its secrets waiting patiently beneath the Umbra's veil. Captain Rourke's office was a stark contrast to the sprawling megacity outside, a claustrophobic box of concrete, metal, and flickering fluorescent lights. The sharp scent of stale coffee mingled with the ever-present hum of distant sirens and the faint buzz of outdated electronics. Elias Cade sat across from his superior, the weight of expectation pressing down like the suffocating smog that clung to the city's skyline. "Results, Cade," Rourke said, his voice low but uncompromising. "The public's losing faith. Shadows running rampant, and we're supposed to be the shield. I need answers." Elias's eyes, rimmed with exhaustion and shadowed from sleepless nights, met the captain's. "We're making progress. Patterns are emerging. But this isn't just a matter of rogue shadows, it's organized, coordinated." Rourke's gaze didn't soften. "Organized or not, people are dying. Find a way to stop it." The meeting ended with a curt nod, leaving Elias alone with the oppressive silence of the precinct. He rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar prick of anxiety, the gnawing sensation that the shadows lurking at the edges of the city's neon-lit streets might reach him before he could reach them. Across town, in a cramped apartment nestled within a labyrinth of forgotten alleys, Mira Voss sat hunched over a bank of glowing monitors. The blue light bathed her face, sharp and focused, as streams of encrypted data scrolled past her eyes. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, breaking through layers of digital defenses like a ghost slipping through locked doors. Mira's breath caught as she uncovered whispered conversations and fragmented transmissions, Umbra's internal communications rife with tension and betrayal. Factions jostled for power, veiled threats passed in code, all underscored by the cold calculus of control. "They were fracturing," Mira murmured, eyes scanning for anything that could give Elias the edge. Yet beneath the triumph lay a deeper unease. The Umbra network was not just a faceless enemy but a living, breathing organism, its tendrils woven deep into the city's veins. Meanwhile, Elias stood atop a rain-slicked rooftop, the city sprawling beneath him in a chaotic tapestry of neon and shadows. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone, the distant wail of sirens weaving through the night. His gaze locked on the black shape tethered to his feet, his shadow, but tonight it was different. It stretched unnaturally, twitching with a life of its own, a dark puppet dancing to unknown strings. A chill ran down Elias's spine as the shadow flickered, momentarily detached, before snapping back into place. He swallowed hard, the line between self and other blurring in the city's sickly glow. The shadow was no longer a silent follower, it was an unpredictable force with its own will. Back inside the precinct, the suffocating air of Elias's office closed in around him. The walls seemed to pulse with the city's heartbeat, the low murmur of activity, beyond the door, a distant echo. Alone, he felt the creeping tendrils of paranoia tighten their grip. Every movement in the shadows, every whispered rumor, fed into a growing storm of distrust. The faint silhouette of his rogue shadow flickered behind him, a silent specter in the dim light, whispering threats without words. Elias's breath hitched. He was caught in a web of corruption and control, both external and internal, where the lines between hunter and hunted, self and shadow, were dissolving. Mira's encrypted revelations promised a path forward, but the cost was clear. The Umbra network's fractures meant opportunity and danger. Elias's own unraveling mind and the strange autonomy of his shadow foretold a personal horror yet to come. As the chapter closed, Elias stared out into the neon-lit abyss, the city's corruption tightening its grip around him. Somewhere in the tangled depths of light and dark, the true enemy waited not just in the shadows outside, but within the fractured reflection of his own identity. The hunt was far from over, and the shadows were no longer just running, they were hunting. The city breathed beneath a pallid sky, its neon veins pulsing erratically like a living organism on the brink of convulsion. Elias Cade and Mira Voss sat hunched over a translucent holo map in the cramped confines of their temporary safe house, the faint hum of outdated tech filling the silence between them. Each glowing node on the map represented a recent shadow attack, an eerie footprint of detachment and malice. Slowly, patterns emerged, the attacks clustered around districts under the subtle dominion of the Umbra network. "See here," Mira pointed to a dense cluster near the east end, where the city's industrial sprawl blurred into decaying tenements. "These zones aren't random. Umbra's influence runs deep through these streets, law enforcement, corporate fronts, even the local gangs answer to them." Elias' eyes narrowed, tracing the lines that connected the dots. "So the attacks are coordinated, not just chaos. Umbra's pulling strings, using these shadows like puppets." Mira nodded, her expression tight. "And that means they have operatives inside the precinct, feeding information, sabotaging any real progress we make." The thought gnawed at Elias' resolve. Trust was a currency long devalued in this city, and now it was slipping through his fingers like smoke. Meanwhile, Agent Klein sat in a shadowed corner of the police precinct, his fingers dancing over a concealed data pad. From behind the cracked glass panel of the interrogation room, he watched Elias and Mira with cold amusement. To the rest of the force, Klein was just another officer, reliable, efficient, unassuming. But beneath that veneer lay a calculating mind, loyal only to Umbra's inscrutable agenda. A faint smirk curved his lips as he sent a coded message into the underworld, a signal to disrupt the Doe's investigation further. Every step Elias and Mira took was monitored, every lead subtly twisted or erased. The stakes had never been higher. Later that night, rain slicked the streets, turning neon reflections into fragmented pools of light. Elias and Mira took position on a narrow rooftop overlooking a notorious Umbra-controlled district. The air was dense with the metallic scent of wet concrete and the distant hum of malfunctioning street lamps. "Stay alert," Elias whispered, scanning below. His shadow stretched long and thin beside him, but unease prickled at the back of his mind. Something was off. Suddenly, his shadow flickered, twitching independently. Elias's breath caught. Before he could react, the silhouette detached, slipping silently into the gloom. His heart hammered as he watched it merge with the darkness, moving with purpose and menace. A muffled explosion shattered the night's fragile quiet. Elias lunged toward the edge, eyes wide, as chaos erupted below a shadow attack in the heart of the district. The autonomous shadow had struck without its owner's consent. Mira's voice came through his earpiece, sharp with concern.
"Elias!
"Are you okay?" He swallowed hard, voice strained. "My shadow, it just acted on its own. I barely got out." The incident shattered the fragile illusion of control Elias had clung to. The hunter was becoming the hunted, and the lines between self and shadow blurred beyond recognition. Back in their safe house, Mira confronted Elias with a mix of frustration and empathy. "You re-shutting me out, Elias. We need each other now more than ever." He looked up, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and paranoia. "How can I trust even myself when my shadow betrays me?" A heavy silence fell between them, punctuated only by the distant sirens and the city's restless breathing. The surreal horror of their predicament pressed in like the ever-present haze outside, a constant reminder that in this city, control was an illusion, and shadows could not be trusted. But surrender was not an option, not yet. The fight had only just begun. Elias's mind raced with questions that had no answers. What force could command shadows to such autonomy? Was it Umbra's doing or something darker? And if his own shadow could turn against him, what hope was there for anyone else? The rain continued to fall, washing the city in cold light, but the shadows beneath remained restless, waiting, watching. And Elias knew that to survive, he had to face the nightmare within himself, even if it meant losing the very thing that defined him. As dawn approached, the city stirred, oblivious to the silent war waging in its underbelly. Elias and Mira prepared to dive deeper into the machine, a labyrinth of corruption, betrayal, and unrelenting darkness where shadows walked without bodies, and trust was the rarest commodity of all. The night was far from over, and the shadows had only just begun to move. The rain was relentless, drumming a cold, rhythmic tattoo against the grimy windows of the precinct and turning the streets outside into slick mirrors of fractured neon. Elias Cade stood at the edge of the alley, trench coat clinging to his tall frame, breath shallow and fogging in the chill night air. His eyes, sharp and restless, scanned the darkness for the faintest flicker of movement, a shadow unbound from flesh, a wraith among the forgotten. Somewhere ahead it flickered, a jagged distortion against the concrete and steel, a rogue shadow, untethered and dangerous.
"There!"
Elias hissed, voice barely audible over the steady rain. He took off down the alley, boots splashing through puddles reflecting the fractured city lights in shards of blue and crimson. The shadow twisted and darted ahead with a fluid, unnatural grace, slipping past obstacles with a flicker of smoky tendrils. It was both everywhere and nowhere, a living absence that taunted the hunter with its spectral dance. Behind him, the muffled shouts of his team and the faint clicks of communication devices were swallowed by the storm. Elias's heart hammered, a wild drumbeat syncing with the relentless rain. Every step brought him closer to the impossible, capturing a thing that was both part of and apart from this world. The chase led through labyrinthine alleys, narrow corridors where the city's neon veins pulsed weakly through the fog. The shadow twisted into a narrow passageway, and Elias lunged, fingers closing on nothing but wet air. The creature slipped past, its form briefly solidifying into a dark silhouette etched with cryptic, shifting patterns symbols that seemed almost alive. Suddenly the shadow halted, pulsing with a strange, low vibration. Elias froze, senses sharpening. Then, as if responding to an unspoken command, the shadow emitted a sequence of flickering shapes, a staccato rhythm of light and dark that defied immediate comprehension. "What the hell?" Elias whispered, eyes wide. The shadow's communication was unlike anything had imagined, a language woven from darkness itself. The moment stretched taut before a sudden flare of static from behind startled him. His partner, Mira Voss, appeared at the alley's mouth, rain plastering her cropped hair to her forehead.
"Elias!"
"We've got backup. You're pushing too far alone," she called out, voice sharp but tinged with concern. He shook his head, eyes never leaving the shifting silhouette. "It's not just a mindless parasite, Mira. It's trying to tell us something." They managed to corner the shadow in a dilapidated warehouse, beams of floodlights slicing through the darkness. Elias moved with practiced precision, activating containment devices designed to trap these elusive entities. The shadow writhed, its cryptic symbols glowing brighter, pulsing with an eerie rhythm that filled the space with a palpable tension. Once secured, Elias retreated to a safe house, a dim, cramped room cluttered with screens and scattered data pads. The rain hammered the windows as he obsessively replayed hours of footage, eyes bloodshot and face drawn. Patterns emerged from the chaos, repeated gestures, flickering codes embedded within the shadow's movements, whispers of a language hidden in darkness. Days blurred into nights. Elias's world contracted to this single obsession. Mira tried reaching out, but each attempt was met with silence or curt dismissal. His isolation deepened, paranoia creeping into his thoughts like a poison. The shadows outside were no longer just threats. They became mirrors reflecting his own fractured psyche. One evening, Mira cornered him in the precinct's narrow corridor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Her piercing gaze locked on his haunted eyes. "Elias, you can't do this alone. You were losing yourself. We were partners, you have to trust me." He looked away, jaw clenched. Trust. After everything, how can I when my own shadow is turning against me? Her voice softened. "Then let me help you carry the weight. We're in this together." Reluctantly, Elias nodded, the first flicker of connection in days. Back at the containment unit, the rogue shadow shifted restlessly, cryptic symbols glowing within its silhouette like a pulse of dark light. Elias leaned close, listening to the subtle vibrations that seemed almost like whispered secrets twisting in the air. The revelations promised answers, but also deeper mysteries, questions about identity, control, and the thin line separating man from shadow. As the city outside roared with neon and rain, Elias realized the hunt was far from over. The shadows were no longer just enemies, they were enigmas, and the truth they held threatened to shatter everything he thought he knew. The fragile boundary between self and other was dissolving, and with it, Elias's grip on reality. The stale air of the laboratory hung heavy with the scent of ozone and mechanical grease, punctuated by the low hum of machines struggling to pierce the city's enveloping gloom. Flickering monitors cast intermittent pale blues and greens across the cluttered room, illuminating faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion. Elias Cade stood rigid, his trench coat a dark silhouette against the pale light, eyes narrowed as Draz Leonard Huxley adjusted the strange device perched atop a metal table. "This," Huxley began, voice rough yet fervent, "is the latest in shadow tracking technology. It uses a combination of photonic resonance and quantum fluctuation mapping to detect and predict shadow movements beyond normal sensory perception." Elias' gaze never wavered. "And you expect me to believe this isn't another Umbra ploy?" Huxley's disheveled hair shook with a dry chuckle. "Believe what you will, detective, but the city is drowning in shadows, and without new tools, we were fighting blind." Mira Voss, standing off to the side, crossed her arms, her piercing gaze flickering between Elias and Huxley. The laboratory's glow highlighted the sharp lines of her face, the intensity of her pragmatic mind wrestling with the moral quagmire before her. Outside, the city's rain-slicked streets whispered memories of a life she once lived, a life fueled by rebellion and idealism. The cold night air seemed to seep through the cracked window panes, carrying with it distant echoes of chants and shattered glass from her days as a cyber activist. Those were days when the law was an adversary, not a shield. "I don't know if I'm ready to wear that badge again," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying everything I stood for." Elias glanced at her, the weight of his own battles shadowing his features. "We were all broken in this city, Mira. The question is whether we let that break us or make us stronger." Back in his cramped apartment, Elias sat hunched over a table, the dim light from a single bulb flickering weakly above. His eyes were fixed on the peeling wallpaper where his shadow danced, twitching unnaturally, as if struggling to free itself from the confines of his body. The silence pressed down on him like a physical force, his breath shallow and rapid. He reached out hesitantly, fingers trembling, as if trying to grasp something intangible. The shadow recoiled, then writhed, mocking him in silence. A cold sweat broke across his brow. "Not again," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of fear and paranoia. The next day, the sterile cold of the police interrogation room was pierced only by the incessant buzz of fluorescent lights. Elias confronted Huxley directly, his voice low and edged with accusation. "You retangled up with Umbra. How deep does this go?" Huxley's eyes flickered with a flash of something unreadable. "Umbra's reach is long, detective. But I'm not their pawn. My allegiance is to the science, to the truth behind these shadows. But truth in this city was a slippery thing, distorted by power and corruption." Elias's mind raced, the boundaries between ally and enemy blurring as the shadows lengthened around him. Meanwhile, Mira's internal conflict simmered beneath her calm exterior. Each hack into Umbra's encrypted networks revealed fractures within the call, but also painful reminders of her activist past, the ideals she once fought for, now entangled with the grim realities of law enforcement. Trust was a rare commodity, and loyalty often a dangerous gamble. As the investigation deepened, Elias's grip on reality frayed further. Shadows no longer conformed to the natural laws. They moved with a will that chilled the marrow. His own shadow's erratic behavior mirrored his unraveling psyche, a dark reflection of the chaos consuming the city. The chapter closed with Elias staring into the fragmented reflections cast by rain-slicked windows, the city's neon lights bleeding into the darkness. Questions gnawed at him. Could he wield Huxley's technology without falling into the Umbra trap? Was Mira's loyalty steadfast, or was the past destined to undo them both? And most haunting of all, was he still himself, or was the shadow already claiming him? The answer lay hidden in the shifting darkness, where light and shadow danced their eternal, treacherous waltz. The city was drowning in chaos. Neon lights flickered erratically, casting fractured patterns across rain-slicked streets. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed sharp, insistent, a cry for order amidst the growing disorder. But order was slipping through the cracks like water through a broken dam. Shadows detached, autonomous and malevolent, prowled the alleys and thoroughfares, striking with impunity. Tonight, the detachment phenomenon had reached a new, terrifying peak. Elias Cade's trench coat flapped against the biting wind as he hurried through the narrow streets of Sector 7. The rain drenched him, soaked through his worn fabric and chilled his bones. Yet he barely noticed. His gaze was fixed on the flickering holo map projected from his wrist, tracing the path of recent shadow attacks. Each red dot represented another victim, another fragment of chaos unleashed upon the city. Another one just came through, a voice crackled in his ear. Mira's voice, steady but tense. Shadow attack near the old market, multiple casualties. Elias cursed under his breath. On my way. The market was a cramped labyrinth of stalls and narrow passageways, now transformed into a scene of carnage. Flickering neon signs sputtered above shattered glass and overturned carts. The air was thick with the metallic stench of blood and the acrid smoke of burning synth fabric. Elias's footsteps echoed as he reached the epicenter, a cluster of terrified survivors huddled beneath a flickering street lamp. Their shadows fluttered unnaturally, disconnected and twisting like living smoke. They came out of nowhere. A trembling man stuttered. The shadows. They attacked without bodies. Elias felt the familiar chill of dread creep up his spine. Stay calm. We'll contain this. But calm was a fragile veneer. Suddenly, a distorted shape materialized from the darkness, the detached shadow of a victim, its form a writhing, formless mass that twisted and pulsed with unnatural energy. It lunged with terrifying speed, a black smear against the neon-lit backdrop. Elias barely dodged, the shadow's tendrils grazing his arm, leaving a cold, burning sensation. He drew his pulse pistol, firing a burst of energy that shimmered in the damp air. The shadow recoiled but did not dissipate. It's evolving, Elias muttered, eyes narrowing, they relearning. Behind him, the crowd scattered in panic as the shadow reformed, shifting shape and preparing to strike again. Elias steadied his breathing and fired once more, this time a precise shot that shattered the shadow into writhing fragments before they dissolved into the rain. Too close, he said, wiping sweat and rain from his brow. A hand touched his shoulder. Mira appeared from the shadows, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. Umbro's pushing harder, she said grimly. I've been tracking their communications. They're exploiting every crack in the city's psychosocial unrest, fear, grief to amplify shadow detachments. It's not random chaos, it's orchestrated. Elias's jaw clenched. So the city's unraveling isn't just collateral damage, it's the plan. Mira nodded, and it's working. The more people lose control, the more their shadows slip free. They moved quickly, the weight of the city's unraveling pressing down on them with suffocating intensity. Mira pulled up encrypted data streams on her portable interface, fingers flying over holographic keys as she decrypted Umbro's coded messages. Listen to this, she whispered. Phase 3 initiation, escalate emotional triggers, deploy agents to foment unrest. They're reusing fear and chaos like weapons, turning the city's own psyche against itself. Elias stared out over the rooftops, the sprawling megacity, a maze of flickering lights and shadowed alleys, the neon glow casting long, distorted silhouettes. His own shadow at his feet twitched unnaturally, flickering between allegiance and rebellion, a dark reflection of his fractured mind. We're running out of time, Elias said, voice low. If Umbra controls the shadows and the people's emotions, what hope is left? Mira's eyes met his, fierce and resolute. Hope is what we make of it. We fight back. But as they delved deeper into Umbra's web, the city's darkness grew heavier, the shadows more unpredictable. A violent encounter with a rogue shadow left Elias physically wounded and mentally shaken, the cold touch of betrayal lingering like a stain. And above all, the question gnawed at him. How much of himself could he reclaim before he was lost completely to the darkness? The night closed in, and the city held its breath, waiting for the next move in a game where shadows and souls alike were at stake. The rain was relentless, drumming a chaotic rhythm against the neon-lit streets of the city, washing the grime of a million forgotten lives into the gutters. Elias Cade moved through the fog-shrouded alleyways, trench coat collar turned up against the chill, his eyes sharp beneath tired lids. The city's pulse was a dissonant symphony of flickering holo ads and distant sirens, but beneath it all, a new terror thrummed the rogue shadows. His own shadow stretched before him, warped and twitching with a life of its own. It lagged just a fraction behind him, but the twitching was no longer a mere trick of light. It was deliberate, a stutter of movement that didn't match the rhythm of his steps. Elias stopped abruptly, heart hammering in his chest, eyes narrowing as he watched the darkness flicker unnaturally. Not again, he muttered, voice barely audible over the rain. He'd felt it before, that creeping disquiet when his shadow hesitated, twitched, or moved differently. But tonight it was worse. It was watching him, waiting, calculating. The city's shadows had become predators, and now his own shadow was turning on him. Elias's thoughts scrambled as he rounded a corner into a narrow alley, slick with rain and illuminated only by the flickering glow of a failing neon sign. He moved cautiously, every sense heightened. Then, without warning, the shadow lunged. It detached in a fluid, unnatural way, stretching impossibly long before snapping forward with a speed that defied logic. Elias barely had time to react as cold darkness surged forward, wrapping around his limbs like living smoke. His breath hitched as the shadow constricted, a crushing pressure that threatened to suffocate not just his body but his very will. Pain blossomed in his chest, sharp and consuming, as the shadow's malevolent presence pressed into him. He struggled, fists pounding the oily blackness, but it was relentless, an echo of himself turned predator. No, he gasped, desperation igniting a fire in his eyes. Suddenly, the shadow recoiled like a struck beast, slipping away into the fog as quickly as it had attacked. Elias collapsed against the damp brick wall, gasping for air, sweat mingling with rain on his brow. His heart thundered with a terror deeper than physical pain, the realization that the hunter had become the hunted.
"Elias!"
Mira's voice cut through the haze, sharp and urgent. She appeared at the alley's mouth, rain-soaked and determined, her piercing gaze locking onto him. "Are you all right?" He shook his head slowly, trying to steady his trembling hands. "It was my shadow. It attacked me." Mira's eyes widened, a mixture of fear and disbelief flashing across her face. "We need to get you out of here. Now." They moved swiftly, navigating the labyrinthine streets to her apartment, a sanctuary of flickering screens and humming servers. Mira's fingers flew over the keyboard as Elias slumped into a chair, exhaustion and dread weighing down his limbs. "There's something different about your shadow," Mira murmured, eyes scanning the data streaming across her monitors. "It's not just rogue, it's aware." Elias clenched his jaw, the weight of that word heavy on his tongue. Awareness meant intent, malice, betrayal. "How do you fight something that's part of you?" he whispered. Mira didn't have an answer. Instead, she pulled up encrypted Umbra communications, her fingers hesitating as she uncovered threads of sabotage and manipulation woven through the city's darkest corners. Agent Klein's shadowy presence loomed in every data set, a ghost in the machine, undermining their efforts. The room seemed to close in around Elias as he grappled with the impossible truth. His shadow, his very self, had turned against him. The line between identity and otherness blurred into a suffocating fog. Night deepened outside, the city's neon glow casting fractured reflections on rain-slicked streets. Elias stared at the cracked pavement, eyes fixed on the familiar silhouette flickering at his feet. It wavered, then slipped away, dissolving into the mist like a lost fragment of his soul. "I'm no longer the hunter," he said quietly, voice edged with despair. "I'm the hunted." Mira reached out, her hand steadying his trembling one. "Then we find a new way, together." But as the shadows lengthened and the city whispered its secrets, Elias knew the path ahead was darker than ever, a descent into the unknown where every step might be his last. The hunter was hunted now, and the game had only just begun. The rain hammered on the cracked pavement as Elias moved with measured steps through the city's labyrinth. His mind replayed the attack, the cold grip of his shadow's betrayal etched into his memory. Every flicker at the periphery of his vision set his nerves alight. He stopped beneath the flickering neon sign of a rundown diner, the hum of faded advertisements mixing with distant sirens and the steady patter of rain. His shadow stretched before him, twitching and flickering without his command. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, voice raw. No answer came, only the silent, mocking dance of darkness. Inside the diner, the air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and stale tobacco. Mira sat in a corner booth, eyes fixed on a wall of screens that mapped shadow activity across the city. Her face was drawn, but resolute. "We were running out of time," she said without looking up. "Umbra's plans are accelerating." Elias slid into the seat opposite her, exhaustion weighing heavy on his frame. My shadow attacked me, almost killed me. Mira finally met his gaze, the sharpness in her eyes softened by concern. Then we re-in deeper than we thought. The city outside seemed to hold its breath, a restless giant watching its own unraveling. Elias felt the walls closing in, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down. I don't know if I can trust myself anymore, he confessed. Mira reached across the table, her hand steady on his. You're not alone. But even as her words offered a fragile lifeline, Elias knew the shadow lurking within was a darkness not easily tamed. The hunter was hunted, and survival meant confronting the very essence of his fractured self. Later, in the cramped confines of the precinct, Elias sat slumped at his desk, the dull glow of his terminal illuminating lines of data and surveillance footage. Agent Klein's interference was evident: encrypted files deleted, shadow tracking devices sabotaged. Captain Rorke's voice echoed in his mind, a reminder of the pressure mounting from above. Results, Cade. We need results. But how could he produce results when the enemy was a part of him? Mira entered quietly, a data chip in hand. I think I found something, she said, voice low. A pattern in the shadows, detachment spikes around moments of emotional turmoil. Elias rubbed his face, exhaustion deepening the lines etched by sleepless nights. So the shadows feed on chaos. She nodded. And your shadow, it's feeding on you. The truth settled like a stone in his gut. His own mind was battleground, his identity fractured, his shadow a rogue agent. The city's darkness was not just around him but within. The hunt had shifted. Elias was no longer the predator, he was prey, and the shadows were closing in. The city outside Elias Cade's apartment window throbbed with restless neon light, a kaleidoscope of fractured colors bleeding through the grime-smeared glass. The rain fell steadily, drumming a relentless rhythm that echoed the turmoil inside his mind. He sat motionless in the darkened room, the worn trench coat draped over the back of a cracked leather chair, shadows flickering across his angular features like restless phantoms. His eyes, sunken and shadowed, tracked the erratic pulse of the city below, a sprawling mass of steel and suffering, where shadows, detached from their owners, prowled like predators, reminders of his own betrayal. Since the ambush, since his shadow had turned against him, Elias had become a ghost in his own life. The camaraderie that had once anchored him to the investigation, and to Mira Voss now seemed like a distant memory. He recoiled from their concern, mistrust gnawing at the edges of his sanity. The betrayal was not just external. It was woven into the very fabric of his being, a fracture that threatened to splinter him beyond repair. Mira's knock was tentative at first, barely audible over the storm's crescendo. When he didn't respond, she tried again, firmer this time. Elias, please. Her voice was low, edged with worry. We need to talk. He didn't move. The silence was a wall between them, thick and impenetrable. She stepped inside, the scent of rain and ozone clinging to her pragmatic attire. Her piercing gaze searched his face, reading the exhaustion and despair etched there. You can't do this alone, she said softly, crossing the room to sit opposite him. But Elias only shook his head, bitterness curling his lips. You don't understand, he muttered. It's not just the shadows out there. One's inside me now. Mira reached out, hesitating before placing a hand on his arm. We're still fighting this together. You don't have to carry it all. The words hung fragile in the charged air, but Elias pulled back, retreating further into his isolation. Each attempt to reach him seemed to dissolve like mist, swallowed by his growing paranoia. Meanwhile, far from the flickering lights and rain-streaked windows, Agent Klein's presence festered like a shadow within the police precinct. In a dimly lit backroom, fractured holographic displays flickered, casting ghostly light on his obscured figure. His voice was a cold whisper, issuing orders through encrypted channels. Every sabotage, every misstep inflicted upon Elias's team was a calculated move in Umbra Network's broader game, a game of control, corruption, and chaos. Captain Rorke's gruff voice cut through the tension during a rare confrontation in the precinct's cramped office. Cade, you re-slipping, he said, eyes narrowing beneath heavy brows. We need results, not ghosts. The city's unraveling, and you read the last line. Alias met the glare, exhaustion and defiance warring in his gaze. I'm doing what I can, he replied, voice low but firm. This isn't just about shadows. It's about what's inside them and inside us. Outside, the city's sirens wailed in a chorus of desperation. The shadows moved with increasing violence, and the fragile order that once held was fracturing beyond repair. Elias's inner battle mirrored the chaos unleashed in the streets, a man haunted by loss, betrayed by his own shadow, struggling to hold onto the fragments of his identity. As the night deepened, Elias found himself at a crossroads, the weight of isolation pressing down like a suffocating shroud. Could he break through the frayed edges of his mind and trust again? Or would the shadows consume him entirely, leaving behind only a hollow shell lost to the creeping darkness? The answers lay buried in the city's neon veins, in the tangled web of corruption and control that Umbra wove with cruel precision. And time was running out. Elias Cade's eyes fluttered open to a sterile, humming quiet that was both alien and terrifying. The air was cold, biting at his skin despite the thin hospital gown wrapped loosely around his frame. Above him, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, their harsh glare casting stark shadows on the pale walls. He tried to move, but his limbs felt like lead, unresponsive and fragmented, as if the very fabric of his body had frayed. A sudden flicker caught his gaze. Shadows, unmoored from their usual anchors, danced silently on the walls. They twisted and writhed, grotesque and unnatural, as if mocking the fragile state he now occupied. Panic surged, but his mind was caught in a liminal space between consciousness and oblivion. Elias, a voice whispered, breaking the oppressive silence. He turned his head with effort to see Mira Voss standing nearby, her sharp eyes softened by worry. You're awake. Her presence was an anchor in the disorienting haze. Mira's short, cropped hair framed a face hardened by experience yet open with empathy, a beacon amid the creeping shadows. She pulled a chair close, fingers trembling slightly as she manipulated a holographic interface, streams of encrypted data cascading before her. Your shadow. Elias, she said carefully, it's not just rogue. It killed you. The words hit like a blow. Cade's mind grappled with the impossible truth. His own shadow, his most intimate reflection, had turned predator, extinguishing the man who had chased these spectral criminals for so long. He was trapped between life and death, a ghost in his own body. Outside the safe house's dim neon glow, the city roiled with chaos. Rogue shadows slipped through rain-slicked alleys, their formless shapes warping beneath flickering streetlights, silent hunters without bodies. Elias and Mira moved cautiously, every sense heightened. The oppressive wetness seeped into their bones, the echo of footsteps a relentless reminder of the ever-present threat. We were not just dealing with random detachment anymore, Mira whispered. Umbra's grip is tightening. They want to finish what they started, make sure no one survives to expose them. Elias nodded, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. His mind spiraled through fractured reflections, memories splintered like the shards of a broken mirror he once stared into in his apartment. His shadow's absence was a constant void, a black mark on his fractured identity. In the growing darkness of the city, Elias realized that reclaiming his shadow was not just a matter of survival, it was a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of his soul. Yet with every step he took, the boundary between self and shadow blurred further, threatening to consume him utterly. Beneath the city's neon-lit veneer, where the pulse of power throbbed like a malignant heartbeat, Elias Cade and Mira Voss stood at the threshold of Umbra's labyrinthine core. The descent was not merely physical, but symbolic, a journey into the veins of corruption that nourished the shadow rebellion. The air grew heavier as they navigated a narrow stairwell, the cold metal rails slicked beneath their fingers, echoes of their footsteps swallowed by humming machinery and distant, muffled conversations. The underground facility sprawled like a hive of clandestine activity. Walls were adorned with flickering screens, each displaying cryptic data streams and live feeds of shadows darting through the city's veins. The faint glow cast harsh angles across Elias's worn trench coat, his angular features etched with exhaustion and grim determination. Beside him, Mira's piercing gaze scanned every detail, her fingers twitching with restrained impatience. Here, in this mechanical underworld, the city's true heartbeat was exposed, a network of control, manipulation, and silent war. "This is worse than we imagined," Mira murmured, her voice barely above a whisper as they approached a central console cluttered with encrypted files and schematics. Umbra isn't just orchestrating shadow attacks, they're weaponizing fear itself. Elias nodded, his mind racing to piece together the implications. The shadows, once ethereal extensions of the self, had become instruments of chaos, puppets in a game played by faceless elites. But who orchestrated this symphony of darkness? The answer, he feared, lay deeper than any shadow could reach. Their investigation led them to a cluttered laboratory, a sanctuary of scientific obsession hidden from the world above. Here, Leonard Huxley awaited, his disheveled appearance a stark contrast to the sterile precision of his surroundings. Tubes, wires, and arcane devices cluttered the space. But it was the strange device clutched in his trembling hands that drew Elias's attention, a tool designed to track the elusive movements of the detached shadows. Huxley's eyes flickered with a manic intensity as he greeted them. "Detective Cade, Mira," he began, voice a brittle blend of hope and fear. "You don't understand the forces at play. Umbra's reach is vast, and what you see is just the surface." Elias studied the scientist carefully, noting the subtle tremor in his hands and the haunted look behind his wild eyes. "Are you with Umbra, or against them?" Elias demanded, his tone sharp but controlled. Huxley hesitated, then sighed deeply. "I'm a prisoner of my own creation, caught between redemption and ruin, the shadows. They are both a curse and a key. Umbra exploits them for power, but there's more to their detachment than mere weaponization." Mira exchanged a glance with Elias, uncertainty clouding her features. The scientist's ambiguous allegiance complicated their mission, forcing a delicate balance between trust and skepticism. As they pressed deeper, Elias intercepted a clandestine meeting of Umbra operatives. Faces obscured by shifting shadows, voices laced with conspiracy. Discussions of power plays, betrayals, and the looming shadow rebellion echoed through the chamber. Elias's heart pounded, the weight of betrayal settling like a stone in his gut. Here, in the dim glow of secrecy, the true scope of Umbra's ambitions was laid bare. Returning to his apartment, Elias found no solace. The cracked mirror before him fractured his reflection, mirroring the turmoil within. Neon lights from the city outside cast elongated, pulsing shadows that seemed alive, mocking, menacing. Alone he grappled with the duality that had defined his existence, enforcer and victim, hunter and hunted, man and shadow. His thoughts spiraled, haunted by the knowledge that reclaiming control might exact a cost greater than he dared imagine. Yet, despite the dread and fractured resolve, a steely determination anchored him. The city's fate, and perhaps his own, hinged on the choices forged in the crucible of this veiled underworld. The shadows were no longer mere silhouettes in the dark. They were the veins through which power and corruption flowed, and Elias Cade was ready to uncover every secret, no matter the price. "We have to move fast," Mira urged, eyes flickering to the encrypted data scrolling across her holo pad. "Umbra's fractures mean they're vulnerable, but if we hesitate, they'll tighten their grip again." Elias's gaze hardened. "Then we press forward. No more shadows to hide behind." But as the city's heartbeat pulsed beneath them, one question lingered. Could he reclaim not only the city, but the fractured pieces of himself before the shadows consumed them both? The hunt was far from over. The city was breaking apart. Neon signs flickered erratically, casting fractured pools of light onto the cracked pavement slick with rain and spilled oil. Elias Cade moved through the streets like a ghost himself, his trench coat clinging damply to his angular frame. Each step echoed hollowly, swallowed quickly by the cacophony of sirens, distant screams, and the restless murmur of a city on the edge of collapse. Around him, shadows flitted with unnatural autonomy, silent, predatory, and chaotic. No longer mere extensions of their owners, these dark entities slipped along walls and darted between alleyways, their movements jagged and erratic. The air thrummed with the metallic tang of ozone and the acrid smoke of burning electronics. Neon advertisements, once vibrant beacons, now sputtered, their colors bleeding into one another like wet ink, mirroring the city's unraveling. Beside him, Mira Voss's expression was a mask of tense concentration. Her fingers danced across a portable holo interface, streams of encrypted data cascading down translucent panels. The cold blue glow illuminated her short-cropped hair and sharp features, eyes bright with grim determination, despite the exhaustion shadowing them. Umbros moving faster, she murmured, voice barely audible over the distant rumble of destruction. They're re-coordinating strikes across multiple districts. It's no longer random, this is an orchestrated rebellion. Elias's jaw tightened. We need to cut their control nodes. Disrupt the network before it spreads out of control. Mara nodded, tapping rapidly to bring up schematics of the city's underbelly. There. 3 major data hubs they're reusing to command the shadows. If we can take those offline, we might buy some time. The pair slipped through the fractured cityscape, moving with practiced stealth amid the chaos. Buildings groaned under the weight of neglect and violence, glass shattering like crystalline rain with every distant explosion. Shadows writhed along walls and underfoot, their shapes shifting grotesquely as if mocking the fragility of the human forms they once mirrored. As they approached the first node, Elias felt a chill crawl along his spine. His own shadow lingered unnaturally long beside him, twitching like a living thing on the verge of rebellion. He shook off the unease, focusing instead on the task at hand. "Cover me," he commanded, drawing a compact pulse weapon calibrated to disrupt shadow energy. Mira nodded, fingers poised over her hacking interface. "Go. I'll handle their security protocols." The entry was guarded by a flickering barrier of shadow and light, a warped liminal space where forms twisted and dissolved. Elias fired precise bursts, each pulse unraveling tendrils of darkness that writhed and hissed. The shadows recoiled, but the barrier held. "Mara," Elias called, voice taut. "It's stronger than I thought. Give me a moment. I'm bypassing their firewalls." The tension was palpable, the air thick with the scent of burning circuitry and damp concrete. Outside, the city convulsed with sporadic eruptions of violence, shadows materializing into grotesque shapes to assault fleeing citizens and law enforcement alike. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the street behind them. Elias spun, catching a glimpse of a collapsing neon sign raining sparks and glass. The acrid smell of smoke burned his nostrils as he shielded Mira instinctively. "We re-exposed," he growled, eyes scanning for threats. Shadows surged forward, their forms morphing into snarling beasts with glowing eyes. Elias's pulse weapon flared, carving arcs of light through the darkness as Mira continued her frantic hacking. "Almost there," she panted. One more second with a final keystroke, the barrier flickered and dissolved. The control node's core blinked erratically before powering down in a cascade of sparks. Relief was short-lived as alarms wailed. Umbros' retaliation was swift. They raced to the next node, the streets now a battleground where light and shadow clashed violently. Elias's mind flashed to the city's neon glow, the fractured cityscape reflecting not just physical destruction, but the shattering of order, identity, and control. Their path was blocked by a massive shadow entity, a pulsating mass of darkness that seemed to absorb the faint city light. Elias drew in a breath, heart pounding, and stepped forward. "This ends tonight," he whispered, voice steady despite the dread coiling in his gut. The entity twisted, shifting as if acknowledging his presence. The line between Elias and his own shadow blurred in that moment, a battle not only for the city's survival, but for the fragile boundary between self and the darkness lurking within. The rain began again, cold and insistent, washing the city in a blur of neon and shadow. The fractured city waited with bated breath, teetering on the knife's edge between salvation and oblivion. And Elias Cade was ready to fight for every flicker of light left in the darkness. The edge of sanity, the city never truly slept, but for Elias Cade, the nights grew longer and darker than ever before. In the suffocating silence of his apartment, the neon glow of the megacity blurred through cracked blinds, casting fractured light across peeling walls and a floor cluttered with files and empty bottles. His trench coat hung limply on a chair, a worn armor now heavy with exhaustion. Eyes sunken and shadowed, Elias sat rigid, fists clenched on his knees, staring at the flickering silhouette that stretched unnaturally across the room. His shadow. It was no longer a mere absence of light, but a living, taunting presence. Tonight it writhed and twisted on the cracked plaster, elongating into grotesque shapes, a clawed hand reaching, a snarling maw gaping wide. Whispered voices emerged from its shifting edges, voices that were at once his own and utterly alien. They spoke of failure, betrayal, and the inescapable darkness lurking beneath his skin. "You can't hold on," the shadow hissed, its voice a dry rasp in the still air. "You are nothing without me, and yet I am everything you fear." Elias' breath hitched. He fought to suppress the tremor that threatened to unravel him. Control, that fragile illusion he had clung to throughout his career, was slipping through his fingers like smoke. The duality he had always wrestled with was no longer theoretical. It was a living nightmare clawing at his mind. A sharp knock shattered the oppressive quiet. "Elias." Mira's voice was tentative but steady as she stepped inside, her short-cropped hair damp from the rain outside. Her piercing gaze swept over the disarray, settling on him with concern. "You need to come in." Umbra just made a move. He managed a hollow nod, rising unsteadily. The walk to the precinct was a blur, the city's neon veins pulsing with an indifferent rhythm, the hum of distant machinery, and the ever-present haze pressing in on his senses. At the station, amidst the buzz of urgent voices and flickering holo screens, Mira laid out the latest data. Umbra's operatives had infiltrated deeper than previously suspected, orchestrating shadow attacks with ruthless precision. Elias's gaze drifted to the corner of the room where a flicker caught his eye. For a split second, his shadow stretched beyond the confines of his body, flickering like a sinister specter. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. Was it merely fatigue, or was the boundary between him and his shadow truly dissolving? "Yuri slipping," Mira whispered, stepping closer. "You need to hold on. We need you." He wanted to believe her, wanted to grasp the fraying threads of his sanity before they snapped. But every time he closed his eyes, the shadow came alive in his mind's eye, speaking in that cruel, mocking tone. Later that night, under the relentless drizzle of rain, Elias sat in a cramped car on an empty street, Mira beside him tapping furiously on a portable console. Their stakeout was silent except for the rhythmic patter of rain against the windshield and the distant sirens weaving through the maze of alleys. Elias's gaze flickered to the rearview mirror. The shadow behind him, or what should have been his shadow, detached briefly, flickering like a living void. His heart hammered. The hunter had become the hunted. Back in his apartment, the nightmare deepened. The shadow spoke again, its voice now unmistakably his own, distorted and cruel. "You cannot win. You are fractured, a broken man chasing ghosts. Let me consume you and be whole again." Elias shook, the oppressive darkness pulsing around him, as if the room itself breathed with malevolent intent. He fought to push back the despair, to reclaim the part of himself that still clung to hope and control. Mara's voice broke through, steady and insistent. "Fight it, Elias. You are more than this." But the edge of sanity was perilously close, and the shadows were waiting, patient and hungry, to claim what was theirs. The battle for Elias's mind had begun, a desperate struggle between light and darkness, self and shadow, control and chaos. And in the depths of that war, the city watched, indifferent and unyielding. The precinct was unusually quiet for the hour, the hum of computers and the occasional tap of keys punctuating a tense atmosphere. Elias Cade sat rigidly in the interrogation room, the stale air heavy with anticipation. Before him, Agent Klein sat composed, his uniform immaculate yet somehow ill-fitting to the man's cold, calculating gaze. The stark, fluorescent light overhead flickered, casting sharp, moving shadows that seemed to taunt the very man who had been hunting shadows for months. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Klein," Elias said, voice low but firm. "Sabotaging investigations, feeding information to Umbra. Why?" Klein smiled thinly, the expression devoid of warmth. "You think you're the only one trying to control the uncontrollable. Umbra understands power in ways you never will." Elias leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You re-betraying your own. This city's on the brink, and you re-pushing it over the edge." Klein's eyes flickered briefly with something almost human before hardening again. "Survival requires sacrifice. You will see that soon enough. Shadows are no longer just reflections, they're weapons." Across the precinct in a cramped but technologically dense office, Mira Voss worked feverishly. The glow of holographic screens illuminated her face, casting neon blues and greens that danced with every rapid keystroke. She hacked through layers of encryption, the complexity of Umbra's communications both a challenge and a revelation. "Elias," she called softly into her comm link, "you need to see this. Umbra isn't just orchestrating the shadow rebellions, they're re-weaponizing the shadows. It's worse than we thought." The message sent a shiver through the detective's spine. Shadow weaponization meant mass destruction, control on a scale previously unimagined. The shadows that once detached sporadically were now being engineered to serve as instruments of terror. Suddenly, the precinct plunged into darkness. The power cut was immediate, a suffocating silence broken only by the flicker of emergency lights. Shadows writhed unnaturally on the walls, elongated and distorted, as if mocking the helplessness of those trapped within. "Sabotage," Elias muttered from the inside. He reached for his Saddam, moving cautiously through the dim corridors with Mira close behind. Every sound was amplified, the distant clatter of a dropped baton, the faint whisper of movement. Paranoia coiled tight around them, the knowledge that betrayal lurked in every shadow. Their path led them to the rooftop of one of the city's towering skyscrapers. Rain slicked the surface, reflecting the chaotic neon glow of the megacity below. Distant sirens wailed, a mournful chorus underscoring the enormity of their discovery. "We're up against more than just rogue shadows," Mira said, voice trembling slightly but resolute. "Umbra's web is tangled deep in every corner of this city." Elias gazed out over the labyrinthine cityscape, light and darkness entwined in a perpetual dance. The corruption, the control, the loss they had witnessed all converged here. "Then we cut the web," he said. "No matter the cost." As the rain began to fall harder, mingling with the neon haze, the two stood at the precipice of a battle that would decide not just the fate of the city, but the fragile boundary between self and shadow itself. The night stretched on, thick with tension and dread. Somewhere in the murky depths of the city, Umbra's plans moved forward, unstoppable, or so it seemed. But Elias and Mira, bound by trust forged in darkness, prepared to strike back, even as the shadows whispered promises of chaos and control. With every moment, the city's heartbeat quickened, echoing the dangerous game unfolding in the shadows. The line between hunter and hunted blurred anew, and the question remained, could they stop the weaponization before the city was consumed entirely? The answer lay buried deep within Umbra's web, waiting to be unraveled. The laboratory was a cavern of shadows and flickering neon, a dissonant symphony of light and gloom that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Elias Cade stepped cautiously across the cracked linoleum floor, his trench coat trailing like a dark shroud behind him. The air was thick with the acrid tang of ozone and burnt circuits, punctuated by the low hum of machines whose purposes eluded him, but whose presence was undeniably ominous. At the center of this chaos stood Judah Leonard Huxley, disheveled and restless, his eyes scanning a holographic projection that danced in the air between them. Jagged shadows wove through the data streams, fractured, autonomous shapes that flickered and writhed with unsettling intent. Elias's gaze locked onto those spectral patterns, a cold knot tightening in his chest. "You wanted answers," Huxley said, his voice a brittle rasp that barely concealed the manic edge beneath. "Here they are." Shadows don't just detach Elias. They re-engineered, birthed from manipulation, from tampering with the very essence of identity. Umbra didn't stumble upon this chaos by accident. They created it. Elias's brow furrowed, disbelief warring with grim acceptance. The Umbra network, the shadowy cable he had hunted through rain-soaked alleys and neon nightmares, was not just exploiting a natural phenomenon. They were its architects. The implications were staggering. If shadows could be engineered, controlled, weaponized, then the city's descent into madness was no accident but a calculated coup. Huxley's fingers danced over the hologram, isolating clusters of shadow movements linked to experimental energy signatures. Years ago, experiments began on the fringes of quantum manipulation and neuropsychic resonance. The goal was to sever the shadow from the self, to create an autonomous entity that could act without the constraints of human morality or law. The words hung heavy in the stale air. Elias swallowed hard, the weight of the revelation pressing down like the suffocating haze outside. "So, my shadow, it's a weapon." In a manner of speaking, Huxley admitted, eyes flickering with a mix of pride and regret. "But it's more than that. Shadows are extensions of the psyche, repositories of subconscious will and fear. When severed, they become mirrors, distorted, fractured reflections of the soul. Umbra harnesses that fracture." A sudden flicker plunged the room into near darkness. The neon strips sputtering as shadows within the lab writhed unnaturally against the walls. Elias's heart slammed against his ribs, breath hitching as the room seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The boundary between light and shadow blurred, and for a moment, the darkness felt sentient, watching, waiting. Huxley's voice cut through the chaos, calm yet edged with urgency. "The experiment's success is also its curse. The more detached the shadow becomes, the more it erodes the host's identity. Reclaiming it isn't just a matter of control, it's a matter of survival." Elias's eyes drifted to a cracked mirror leaning against a wall, its fractured surface reflecting his worried face back at him. The reflection was fragmented, a mosaic of light and shadow that seemed less and less like him with every passing day. "You must understand," Huxley continued, stepping closer, "that what you seek could cost you everything you are. Umbra's ambition isn't merely chaos. It's transformation of the city and of the self." A silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Elias's fingers clenched into fists beneath his coat. The path ahead was littered with shadows, both literal and metaphorical. Each step toward reclaiming his stolen self risked shattering what remained. "Then I have no choice," Elias finally said, voice low but resolute. "If I don't confront this, if I don't understand it fully, the city and I will be lost to the darkness." Huxley's gaze softened, a fleeting glimpse of something almost human piercing the veil of madness. "Very well, detective. But remember, sometimes the mirror doesn't just show who you are. It shows who you might become." As Elias turned to leave, the holographic shadows flickered once more, their cryptic dance a haunting prelude to the battles yet to come. Outside, the city pulsed with neon lights and whispered fears, waiting for the storm to break. And within that storm, Elias Cade would have to confront the fractured reflections of his own soul, or be consumed entirely. The city's pulse quickened, an erratic heartbeat beneath the neon-lit haze that cloaked its sprawling streets. In the subterranean depths where Umbra's cable once held iron grip, cracks now yawned wide. Shadows, once subtle puppets in a grand design, writhed with newfound ferocity, their chaotic dance a reflection of the fractures tearing the network apart. Elias Cade and Mira Voss moved through this turbulence like wary specters themselves, their steps muffled against the rain-slick pavement of the lower city. The chill seeped through Elias's worn trench coat, but it was the cold dread gnawing at his mind that truly unsettled him. Each flicker of peripheral darkness threatened to erupt into violence, shadows detached, untethered, and unrelenting. "They're tearing themselves apart," Mira murmured, fingers dancing over her portable holo interface as she tracked erratic shadow signals. Umbra's fractures aren't just political infighting. They're rebleeding into the shadows themselves. Elias's gaze sharpened, scanning the shifting silhouettes cast by fractured neon. "That means this rebellion. It's no longer controlled, it's pure chaos." They paused at a corner where the faintest whisper of movement caught Elias's eye. A shadow detached abruptly from its trembling owner, a young man caught in the crossfire of a brewing riot. The shadow twisted grotesquely, its form pulsing with malevolent energy before it lunged, striking indiscriminately at protesters and enforcers alike. The air erupted with screams and shouts, a cacophony of human and shadow in violent collision. "We need to contain this," Elias barked, drawing his weapon, its barrel spewing a faint blue glow designed to disrupt shadow movement. Mira's fingers flew, deploying digital nets that shimmered briefly before snaring the rogue shadow in a cage of light and code. The captured shadow writhed, its form flickering erratically, as if protesting its sudden imprisonment. Elias felt a shudder ripple through him, a reflexive shiver born of the intimate terror that shadows could no longer be trusted, not even his own. Back in their makeshift command center, the tension was palpable. Mira's eyes never left the screen, where fractured data streams painted a grim tableau of Umbra's unraveling. Operatives once bound by shared ambition now clawed at one another with venomous suspicion, their whispered betrayals echoing down cold corridors. Elias clenched his jaw, the weight of impending collapse settling like a stone in his gut. "This is more than a rebellion," Mira said softly, exhaustion threading her voice. "It's a war between the shadows of power and we, caught in the middle." Late into the night, atop a crumbling rooftop overlooking the restless city, Elias and Mira surveyed the chaos below. The streets writhed with shadows darting unpredictably, their forms elongated and distorted against the fractured glow of streetlights. The cold air bit at their exposed skin, breaths visible in the darkness. "We're running out of time," Elias said, voice low, eyes scanning the horizon. "Umbra's losing control, but so are we." Mira nodded, a steely resolve sharpening her features. "Then we strike now, before the city burns beyond repair." The fragile alliance of hunter and hunted, human and shadow, teetered on the edge of oblivion. As the city's neon veins pulsed with erratic light, the battle for control of shadows, souls, and survival raged in the depths below, threatening to consume them all. Yet amidst the chaos, a singular truth crystallized. In this city of fractured light and darkness, the shadows were rising, and they would not be silenced. The dim glow of the safe house's multiple monitors painted Mira's face in fractured light. The sharp angles of her features softened only by the shadows that danced with each flicker of encrypted data scrolling across the screens. Outside, the city's neon haze bled through the grimy windows, casting spectral hues that seemed to mock the fragile hope she clung to. The encrypted files revealed a fresh urgency. Umbra's network had shifted tactics again, their moves more brazen. The rebellion gaining momentum as chaos rippled through the Megacity's veins. Mira's fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. The past clawed at her ghosts from her days as a cyber activist rose unbidden, the late nights spent hacking oppressive corporate systems. The rallies in rain-drenched streets, the idealistic chants that now felt like hollow echoes. She had chosen this path to protect, to bring order from the chaos she once helped ignite. Yet, now standing at this intersection of past and present, the lines blurred. Was she betraying her own beliefs by enforcing the law she once sought to dismantle? Or was this the only way to shield the innocent from a darkness that had grown beyond control? The thought gnawed at her, fracturing the resolve she usually wore like armor. Footsteps approaching the safe house snapped her back to the present. Elias stepped inside, his tall frame silhouetted against the neon glow spilling from the street. His eyes, shadowed and wary beneath the brim of his worn trench coat, locked onto hers with an intensity that spoke of shared battles and unspoken fears. "Another long night?" he asked quietly, voice rough but steady. She nodded, the tension in her jaw betraying the storm beneath. Umbra's moves are escalating. They're not just destabilizing the city anymore, they're reshaping it. Elias closed the distance between them, dropping a worn folder onto the cluttered table. "We'll need every edge we can get, but you don't have to carry this alone, Mira." Her gaze softened, the weight momentarily lifting. "I know, and I'm grateful. But sometimes I wonder if I'm still the person who fought for the city's freedom, or if I've become just another cog in the machine." Silence stretched between them, thick with shared pain and precarious hope. Later that evening, they found themselves on a rain-soaked rooftop, the oppressive drone of neon signs and distant sirens weaving a melancholic symphony around them. The city sprawled endlessly beneath, a labyrinth of light and shadow, order and chaos. Elias's hand brushed gently against Mira's, a gesture small yet profound in the cold night air. "We've both lost so much," he murmured. "But whatever happens, we face it together." She nodded, drawing strength from his presence, even as uncertainty gnawed at her heart. Their partnership had weathered storms of paranoia, betrayal, and fear. Now, it was evolving into something fragile, but real, an anchor in a city unraveling at the seams. Back inside the precinct, the tension between them surfaced. Mira's frustration boiled over in a heated exchange about trust and loyalty. "You can't keep shutting me out, Elias," she insisted, eyes blazing. "We need honesty, not silence." His reply was wary but firm. "I'm trying to protect you. Protect us." But this he gestured vaguely toward the shadows that clung to the city walls. "This isn't just about us anymore." The air grew heavy with unspoken fears. Their gazes locked, the vulnerability beneath their hardened exteriors laid bare. It was a moment of reckoning, a crossroads where trust and doubt collided. As Mira slipped away into the night from a flickering street lamp, Elias watched her silhouette merge with the shadows. The neon lights above sputtered, casting an eerie glow like a dying ember. The city, like them, was caught between light and darkness, hope and despair. In this crucible of uncertainty, both knew that the choices ahead would define not only their futures, but the very soul of the city they fought to save. And as the shadows crept ever closer, the lost light within them flickered, fragile, uncertain, but still burning. The night whispered promises of danger and revelation, and neither Elias nor Mira could afford to ignore its call. The air was thick with an oppressive humidity as Elias Cade descended the rusted metal stairs of the abandoned subway station. The city's forgotten veins pulsed beneath his feet, dark arteries filled with stale air and the scent of decay. Neon signs, half destroyed and flickering erratically, cast fractured pools of sickly light that barely penetrated the dense gloom. Every step echoed like a gunshot, swallowed instantly by the cavernous space. He pulled his worn trench coat tighter around him, the fabric damp from the pervasive moisture. Fragments of graffiti sprawled across cracked tiles, twisted faces, cryptic symbols, and words that seemed to shift when not looked at directly. The whispers began almost imperceptibly, curling around the edges of his hearing like a cold breath. Elias paused, senses sharpening, heart hammering. The voices were neither male nor female, neither young nor old, an impossible chorus murmuring secrets just beyond understanding. He forced himself onward, the walls closing in as the shadows lengthened and thickened. His own shadow moved beside him, but something was wrong. It hesitated, flickering as if uncertain of its place. A twitch here, a subtle distortion, their small betrayals that gnawed at his resolve. The boundary between self and shadow was fraying. Suddenly, the shape of his shadow elongated grotesquely against the cracked concrete, twisting into forms that mocked his movements with cruel precision. The darkness around him pulsed. It was no longer passive but seemed to breathe, alive with malevolent intent. Elias's breath caught as he heard a distorted echo of his own voice, a distorted whisper calling his name from the depths of the tunnel. "Elias." The sound was a rasp, familiar yet alien, a lure into the abyss. He clenched his jaw, forcing the creeping panic back. Memories surged unbidden, his lost family member, the violence of shadows past, the betrayal stitched into his very skin. They clawed at his mind, threatening to unravel the fragile threads of his sanity. In the distance, the faint glow of an exit flickered, but Elias ignored the instinct to flee. He pressed deeper, drawn by a mixture of dread and determination. The underground factory loomed ahead, a skeletal relic of industry long dead. Inside, the shadows coalesced into a shifting mass, a rogue entity that absorbed the feeble light and moved with unnatural fluidity. Elias faced it alone, the air vibrating with a palpable menace. His pulse thundered in his ears as the memories of loss and pain slammed into him with renewed force. The shadow hissed, a sound like cracking ice and whispered threats, a reflection of all the horrors Elias had fought to suppress. Yet amid the oppressive darkness, a soft glow appeared. Mira stepped forward, her presence a beacon in the abyss. Her short hair framed a face etched with concern and fierce resolve. The shadows seemed to recoil, reluctant to approach where her light touched. "Elias," she said quietly, "you are not alone." Her words were a fragile lifeline. For a moment, the suffocating dread loosened its grip. They exchanged a glance heavy with unspoken fears, the weight of their shared burden palpable between them. Together, they stood against the encroaching darkness, the fragile boundary between self and shadow trembling but not yet broken. The abyss beckoned still, but Elias's resolve, bolstered by Mira's presence, held firm for now. As they prepared to move forward, the shadows whispered anew, a chorus of lost souls and fractured identities. The city's dark heart beat steadily beneath their feet, a reminder that the fight was far from over, and the abyss was only beginning to reveal its true face. The laboratory was a chaos of humming machinery and flickering screens, shadows cast long and strange across the cluttered walls. Elias Cade stood rigid, his trench coat hanging heavy from his broad shoulders, eyes fixed on the disheveled figure of Dra Leonard Huxley. The scientist's face was drawn, his gaze sharp despite the exhaustion that clung to him like a second skin. He held a small, intricate device in his hands, its surface alive with pulsing blue light. "This is it," Huxley said, voice low, reverberating in the cramped space. "The procedure to reclaim a detached shadow. It's not just a retrieval, it's a merging, a synthesis. You won't just get your shadow back. You will become something different." Elias swallowed hard. The weight of those words settled into his gut like cold lead. He had hunted shadows long enough to understand that control was an illusion. Now, he faced the terrifying prospect of surrendering parts of himself to gain dominion over what had once been his own. Different how? Elias demanded, the edge in his voice betraying the storm beneath his stoic exterior. "It's not just physical," Huxley explained, gesturing to the device. "Your consciousness will intertwine with the shadow's essence. Memories, emotions, impulses, all the things your shadow has evolved, while detached, will merge with your own psyche. The risk is fragmentation. You might lose the continuity of self, become fractured." A cold silence followed. Elias's mind raced back over the months of relentless pursuit, the betrayals, the loss, his own shadow's betrayal being the deepest wound. He thought of Mira, her steady presence, the fragile hope she represented amid encroaching darkness. Later, in the small, sparse safe house where they had taken refuge, Mira sat across from Elias, her piercing eyes searching his face. She reached out, her hand steady as it clasped his. "You are not alone in this," she said softly. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Elias looked down at their joined hands, the warmth a stark contrast to the cold dread gnawing at his insides. "I don't know if I'll be the same when this is over," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you won't," Mira replied, "but whatever you become, I'll stand by you." The following evening, Elias found himself alone on a rooftop overlooking the sprawling megacity. Neon lights flickered beneath a sky thick with haze, casting the city in a surreal, otherworldly glow. The wind tugged at his coat, cold and unforgiving. His shadow stretched unnaturally long and twitchy, erratic in its movements as if eager and reluctant all at once. He grappled with the agonizing choice before him. To reclaim his shadow was to confront the very essence of his fractured identity. The ritual promised power, but at what cost? Was he prepared to risk losing the man he was, the self he had fought to protect? As the city breathed a mechanical symphony below, a sudden shift in the air heralded a vision dark and disorienting. Before him stood a distorted version of himself, the shadow now fully embodied, a sinister doppelganger with eyes that gleamed malevolently. It spoke without words, a silent challenge that echoed in the deepest recesses of Elias' mind. The confrontation was not just physical, it was existential. Elias fought to assert his claim over identity, control, and survival against the shadow self that threatened to consume him. Back in the lab, under Huxley's watchful eye, Elias prepared for the ritual. The device hummed to life, blue light bathing the room in an eerie glow. Mira's presence was a balm, steadying him as the procedure began. Pain and disorientation followed, a tempest of sensation as shadow and man collided within the depths of his consciousness. Memories blurred, emotions twisted, and for a moment, Elias feared he had already lost the battle for his soul. But as the light dimmed and the hum faded, he opened his eyes. The shadow at his feet moved in perfect sync, tethered once more to the man who had once pursued it and now reclaimed it. Yet the victory was bittersweet. Elias felt the fracture within, a splintered self that no longer fit neatly into the world he had known. The price of control had been paid in full, and the road ahead promised no easy redemption. Mira's voice cut through the lingering haze, firm and unwavering. "We move forward, together." Elias nodded, steeling himself against the uncertainty. The final confrontation loomed: the battle against the Umbra network, the Shadow Rebellion, and his own fractured identity. He had reclaimed his shadow, but the war for the city and his soul was far from over. And as the neon city pulsed beneath them, alive with shadows and secrets, Elias stepped into the night, a man remade but forever changed. The night pressed down on the city like a shroud, the neon lights flickering with an almost conspiratorial tremor. Within the cramped underground safe house, Elias Cade sat hunched over a cluster of glowing screens, each one alive with streams of encrypted data. Beside him, Mira Voss tapped relentlessly at her keyboard, the sharp clatter of keys punctuating the heavy silence that wrapped them both. There, Mira whispered, her voice low and urgent, "Look at this cluster of transactions. Umbra's financial fingerprints all over the city's major corporations. This isn't just a rebellion, it's a calculated takeover." Elias's eyes narrowed. The evidence on the screens was damning, shadowy figures masked by layers of digital obfuscation, puppeteering the city's most influential entities. The tangled web was vast, implicating politicians, corporate magnates, and even elements within the police force itself. "They've been pulling the strings from the very top," Elias murmured, feeling the weight of the revelation sink deep. "This isn't just chaos. It's a coup from the shadows." Mira's fingers hesitated before she pulled up a new file, a series of intercepted communications between Umbra operatives. The messages were laced with coded threats and strategic directives, revealing how the shadow detachments had been weaponized to sow fear and destabilize the populace. A sudden noise outside the safe house snapped their attention toward the door. Elias motioned for silence, his hand inching toward the concealed pistol beneath his coat. Through the grimy window, the silhouette of a figure emerged, moving with calculated stealth. It was Juno, the street informant, clutching a small data drive. "Got something," she whispered urgently, slipping inside and handing over the drive. "It's from inside the Umbra network itself. Direct orders, names, dates. Everything." Elias connected the drive to the main console, the screen flooding with new revelations. Names that had been whispered in the darkest corners now flashed boldly: city council members, industrial tycoons, and even Captain Rourke's name appearing in encrypted logs. Rourke, Elias breathed, the sting of betrayal sharp and immediate. He's been feeding them intel all along. Mara's gaze hardened. We need to move fast. If the captain's compromised, the entire department could be a liability. The room's atmosphere thickened with urgency. Elias reached for his coat. We're recalling a meeting. It's time to gather whoever we can trust. The following hours blurred into a fevered haze of whispered phone calls and hurried rendezvous. Allies gathered in a cramped, cluttered room lit only by the pale glow of data streams and scattered maps. Each person brought pieces of the puzzle, their faces etched with exhaustion and resolve. Leonard Huxley was among them, his disheveled appearance belying the storm of knowledge he carried. Under the flickering fluorescent lights of a sterile lab, he had revealed the genesis of the shadow detachment phenomenon, a series of unethical experiments designed to sever the bond between body and shade. Umbra weaponized the shadows, Huxley confessed, voice trembling. They wanted control not just of people, but of their very essence. I was part of it, and we spent years trying to undo the damage. Elias studied the man, torn between suspicion and the desperate need for information. Why help us now? Because, Huxley said, eyes haunted, if Umbra succeeds, the city will be lost to an endless night. As plans crystallized, a storm raged outside, the rain pounding against grimy windows like a drumbeat to the city's collapse. Elias and Mira prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Knowing their enemies lurked not just in the shadows, but within the very institutions meant to protect the city. Later, in a rain-drenched alley, Elias confronted Agent Klein. The operative's cold smile was a mask merging with the darkness, his presence a chilling reminder of the enemy within. "You're running out of time, Detective," Klein hissed, voice like ice. "Umbra controls everything. The shadows will consume you." Elias's grip tightened on his pistol. "Then I'll fight until there's nothing left to consume." This was more than a battle for the city's soul, it was a war for identity, control, and survival. As dawn threatened to break, Elias and Mira stood ready to strike at the heart of the Umbra network, their resolve steeled by the knowledge that failure meant oblivion. The city waited, breath held, as the shadows gathered for the final reckoning. The rain had been relentless all evening, drumming a steady rhythm that mingled with the distant sirens and the muted hum of the city's neon heartbeat. Elias Cade moved silently through the ghostly labyrinth of the abandoned subway station, the faint drip of water echoing beneath the vast concrete canopy. His trench coat, soaked through, clung to his tall, angular frame as his tired eyes scanned the shadows that flickered and quivered like restless phantoms. He could feel the weight of the city pressing down, oppressive, suffocating, a concrete cage where light struggled to survive. But tonight, the darkness was not just absence. It was a living, breathing threat. Shadows shifted unnaturally, detached from their owners, rippling like dark tides across cracked walls. Elias's breath hitched as he caught a movement sharp, calculated just beyond the reach of the flickering light. Agent Klein was here somewhere. The Umbra operative who had been sabotaging their every move, a ghost within the system, a shadow that had slipped beyond control. Elias's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of betrayal and deceit that had undermined their investigation. This confrontation was inevitable. He moved forward, senses honed by years of hunting the intangible. The stale scent of mold mixed with the metallic tang of blood, old or new, Elias couldn't tell. His own shadow stretched long and twisted at his feet, twitching as if warning him of the danger lurking ahead. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a rusted pillar, a silhouette carved sharply against the dull glow of a failing overhead light. Klein's face was a mask of icy arrogance, eyes gleaming with cold calculation. Shadows seemed to cling to him unnaturally, as if they were extensions of his will rather than mere absence of light. Detective Cade, Klein's voice was low, silky with menace. "You're persistent, admirable, but futile." Elias tightened his grip on the worn grip of his sidearm, though he knew this fight would not be won with bullets alone. "Futility is a luxury I can't afford. Not while the city burns under your lies." Without warning, Klein lunged, forceful and precise. The fight was brutal, less a calculated battle and more a raw struggle for survival. Boots scraped wet concrete, fists collided with unforgiving impact, and every breath was a ragged testament to determination. Elias's training battled against Klein's cold efficiency, each blow a question of who would fracture first. Pain blossomed in Elias's ribs, sharp and burning, but he refused to yield. The duality of their conflict mirrored the fractured city itself, light against shadow, trust against betrayal, order against chaos. Klein's smirk faltered as Elias's resilience clawed through the darkness. Meanwhile, miles away in the cramped precinct office, Miravos sat bathed in the ghostly glow of multiple monitors. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, hacking through layers of encrypted Umbra communications. Every decrypted message peeled back another layer of the cabal's internal fractures, disloyal operatives, whispered betrayals, fractured alliances. Her piercing gaze flicked between lines of code and a photo of Elias, battered but unbroken. Despite the anxiety pounding in her chest, her resolve hardened. They were closer than ever to unraveling Umbra's grip, but the cost was mounting. Back in the shadowed alley where the fight had ended, Elias leaned heavily against the cold brick wall. Rain washed away the blood and grime, pooling at his feet in a broken mirror of his reflection. His shadow flickered erratically, a fractured echo of the man he once was and the uncertain path ahead. The city's neon glow faintly illuminated the scene, a melancholic symphony of light and darkness. Elias closed his eyes, the weight of betrayal and exhaustion pressing down. Yet within that fractured darkness, a spark of defiance remained fragile but unyielding. He knew the battle was far from over. Umbra's fractures were deepening, their chaos spreading like a virus. But so long as breath remained, Elias Cade would fight to reclaim control, to mend the fractures, or to be consumed by the shadows that walked without bodies. The night whispered promises of reckoning, and Elias was ready to face whatever came next. The air inside the Umbra stronghold was thick, with a suffocating stillness that seemed to press against Elias Cade's lungs, each breath a labor in the stale, recycled atmosphere. The corridor ahead twisted and stretched, its very geometry betraying logic. Walls rippled with a slow, unnatural pulse, as if the stone itself were breathing alive. Shadows flitted along the edges of his vision, darting and coalescing into shapes that defied reality. Neon light fractured against cracked glass panels, casting fractured prisms onto the warped surfaces like fractured souls trapped within the city's belly. Beside him, Mira Voss moved with practiced stealth, her short hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, eyes sharp and scanning. The soft hum of her comm unit was a lifeline in the oppressive silence, a tether to the outside world. Her fingers brushed lightly over the holographic interface on her wrist, sending encrypted signals to disable alarms and track Umbra operatives. "We were close," she whispered, voice tight but steady, her gaze never leaving the shadows that twisted like serpents along the corridor walls. Elias's trench coat fluttered behind him as he advanced, senses heightened to every flicker of movement. His own shadow clung to his feet, a familiar shape distorted by the unreliable light. But even as he told himself it was just an ordinary shadow, a trick of the neon haze, a cold prickle of dread settled deep in his gut. The thing that had once been his shadow, the thing that had betrayed him so brutally, was out here somewhere, lurking in the darkness, watching. The walls began to close in, narrowing into a labyrinthine nightmare where corridors folded back upon themselves and gravity seemed to falter. Elias's boots echoed hollow and distant, swallowed by the oppressive weight of the place. Suddenly, a flicker caught his eye. There, just beyond his peripheral vision, the shape of his shadow detached itself, slipping away like smoke through a crack, its form flickering wild and malevolent. It paused, turning to regard him with impossible intelligence. No longer a mere silhouette, it shimmered with an eerie sentience, its edges sharp and jagged, like shards of darkness sharpened to a blade's edge. A whisper slithered through the air, a voice both his and not. echoing in his mind with venomous clarity. "You are nothing without me." Elias's breath hitched. The betrayal stung anew, raw and unyielding. "I am more than you," he spat back, voice trembling but resolute. Shadows twisted and writhed around them as the creature lunged, its form fracturing into a swarm of smaller silhouettes that darted like bats in a cave. The battle was as much mental as physical, each strike a clash of wills, a desperate struggle for mastery over identity itself. His shadow moved with uncanny speed and precision, anticipating his every move, exploiting his hesitation. Elias fought back with grim determination, every muscle coiled, every thought focused on reclaiming the self that felt increasingly fragmented. Meanwhile, Mira had found the central control hub, a cavernous chamber pulsing with eerie light and humming machinery. Her fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, hacking into Umbra's core systems under the relentless pressure of incoming fire. Sparks flew as security protocols flared to life, and the air filled with the acrid scent of burning circuits. "Almost there," she muttered, sweat dripping down her temple as she bypassed layers of encryption. Back in the shadow-drenched corridors, Elias's duel reached a fever pitch. The chamber around him flickered with projections of memories, glimpses of the city's neon glow, fragments of his past trauma, the face of the family he lost. Each strike of his shadow echoed with the weight of those memories, a cruel reminder of what was at stake. He stumbled, pain lancing through his side, but the fire in his chest refused to be extinguished. With a guttural roar, Elias summoned every ounce of willpower, driving forward with a final, desperate strike. The shadow shattered into shards of darkness, dissipating into the air like smoke on the wind. Silence fell, a fragile, trembling peace in the heart of chaos. At that moment, Mira's voice crackled over the comm. "Umbra's defenses are down. We've got a window, Elias. Let's end this." He nodded, though she could not see it. The city's fate, his own fractured identity, and the tenuous line between shadow and self all converged in this moment. The final hunt was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, a sliver of hope pierced the darkness. As they prepared to move deeper into Umbra's lair, Elias glanced once more at the streetlight's fractured glow filtering through the cracked ceiling. Shadows still lingered, but he was ready to face them. The hunt was not just for the city's survival anymore. It was a fight for his very soul. And the city waited, breath held beneath the flickering neon haze, for the final reckoning. The air inside Umbra's stronghold was thick with the scent of ozone and decay. Elias Cade stepped forward, each footfall echoing hollowly in the cavernous chamber, its walls alive with flickering neon shadows that writhed and pulsed like sentient smoke. The oppressive glow cast fractured reflections across the cracked tiles beneath his worn boots, distorting his tall, angular frame into a haunted silhouette. His breath came in ragged bursts, eyes scanning, searching for the presence he knew awaited. The silence was punctuated only by the distant hum of machinery and the low whisper of shadows shifting and curling at the edges of perception. Elias's hand tightened around the grip of his pistol, though he knew this confrontation would not be won by bullets. From the shifting darkness, a figure began to coalesce, a fragmented humanoid shadow, its edges flickering and unstable, yet unmistakably familiar. It mirrored Elias's movements with cruel precision, a dark echo mocking every tense muscle and clenched jaw. This was no mere spectre. This was his own shadow, rogue and malevolent, the embodiment of every fractured piece of his identity he had fought to suppress. The battle began without words. Elias lunged, but the shadow slipped through him like smoke, twisting and stretching with unnatural fluidity. It darted to his side, its form elongating into jagged tendrils that lashed out, seeking to bind and consume. Pain flared as the tendrils grazed his skin, leaving icy trails that burned deep within. Elias's mind raced. This was not just a fight for survival, but a struggle for his very soul. The shadow was a manifestation of loss, betrayal, and corruption. Each strike was a reminder of the city's darkness and his own fractured psyche. Yet within the chaos, a flicker of clarity emerged. To defeat this darkness, he could not simply destroy it. He had to confront and reconcile it. From the periphery, Mira Voss watched with eyes alight with anxious hope. Her presence was a beacon amidst the swirling nightmare, a fragile anchor grounding Elias in reality. She whispered into her comm, sending encrypted signals to disrupt Umbra's network, buying Elias precious moments. Sweat dripped down his brow as Elias dodged another lash, then seized an opening. He reached deep within himself, summoning the memories of loss and love, pain and resilience. The shadow faltered, its form flickering wildly. Elias spoke aloud, voice steady despite the chaos. You are part of me. I will not deny you, but I will not be ruled by you. The shadow's mocking smile twisted into something less certain. It hesitated, then began to dissolve, tendrils retreating into the darkness from which they came. Elias collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, as the chamber fell silent save for his ragged breaths. Mira hurried to his side, her gaze searching his exhausted face. You did it, she murmured, but Elias was uncertain. The victory felt hollow, fraught with the weight of what had been lost and what might never be regained. Outside, the city held its breath. The shadows no longer moved with the same malevolent autonomy, but the scars of the rebellion remained etched into its neon-lit streets and fractured souls. Elias rose slowly, eyes reflecting the uncertain twilight of a future where control was fragile and identity fluid. He knew the cost of reclaiming his shadow was steep. It demanded sacrifice, self-awareness, and the acceptance of his own darkness. Yet within that acceptance lay a fragile hope, a chance to rebuild not just the city, but the fractured pieces of himself. As he and Mira stepped back into the shifting maze of the megacity, the pervasive sense of dread lingered, but so did the faintest glimmer of redemption. The battle was won, but the war within and without was far from over. Elias's story was no longer just one of loss and fear, but of the enduring struggle to reclaim the self from the shadows that walk without bodies in a city forever changed. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the soft patter against the rooftop surface, blending with the distant hum of neon signs and the occasional wail of sirens below. Elias Cade stood at the precipice of the cityscape, his trench coat soaked through, clinging to his angular frame. Below him, the sprawling megacity writhed in restless light and shadow, a living organism still healing, still raw from the wounds of the shadow rebellion that had nearly consumed it. His gaze settled on his feet. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, his shadow clung close, though it seemed thinner, more translucent, trembling as if uncertain of its place. The constant companion, once a source of dread and betrayal, had been reluctantly tethered back to his being. Yet beneath the surface of this tentative reunion lay a cavernous emptiness. Elias felt hollow, a man unmoored from the moorings of identity he had once taken for granted. A soft chime echoed from his communicator. Mira Voss's voice, calm but edged with cautious optimism, filtered through. Elias, are you still up there? The precinct's quiet. Thought you might want to come down. He exhaled slowly, turning from the city's edge. Yeah, coming down. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was markedly different from the chaotic frenzy that had gripped it weeks before. Desks cluttered with reports and flickering monitors seemed mundane now, but the weight of what had transpired lingered heavily in the air. Mira sat hunched over a terminal, her short-cropped hair damp from the lingering storm, eyes bright with the glow of data streams. Did you see the latest reports? She asked as Elias slid into the seat across from her. He nodded, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The Umbra network's remnants are scattered, but pockets of resistance still flicker in the shadows. It's not over, Mira. Not really. She gave a small, wry smile, tempered by exhaustion. No, but it's a start. We've given the city a chance to breathe. Their conversation flowed between technical updates and quieter reflections. Mira's empathy softened Elias's pragmatism, providing a rare balm to his worn spirit. Yet beneath their words an undercurrent of wariness persisted, the scars of betrayal and loss refusing to fade. Later, in the dimly lit conference room, Captain Rourke stood at the head of a battered table. His grizzled face bore the marks of countless battles, the deep lines etched by years of stress and command. The room was filled with officers whose eyes flickered with the same mixture of relief and guarded tension. "We've dismantled Umbra's network, but the rot runs deep," Rourke intoned, voice heavy with sobering truth. "Corruption didn't start with shadows detaching, it's been festering beneath the city for decades. Our work isn't done." Elias met Rourke's gaze, the unspoken understanding between soldier and detective binding them. The city's fragile peace was a veneer, a delicate balance that could shatter with a single misstep. As the meeting adjourned, Elias found himself wandering toward the city streets. The neon glow cast kaleidoscopic patterns across the wet pavement, reflecting fractured images of a metropolis struggling to redefine itself. He paused in a narrow alley, bathed in the flickering light of a lone street lamp. There, a shadow detached from its owner lingered hesitantly, swaying as if confused. For a moment, the shadow and Elias regarded each other across the divide of light and dark. Then, as if sensing the fragile truce, it dissolved slowly into the encompassing night, leaving behind a silence tinged with uncertainty. Elias exhaled, the weight of the encounter settling into his bones. The city might have survived the rebellion, but the shadows within both literal and figurative remained restless. The duality of self and shadow, control and chaos, corruption and redemption would continue to shape their fates. "Maybe this is just the beginning," he whispered to the night. And somewhere deep within the city's labyrinth, the echoes of shadows stirred once more, a reminder that peace was fragile and the darkness always waiting. But for now, in this rain-washed dawn, Elias and Mira stood united against the lingering night, holding on to a fragile hope that the city might one day be free. The question remained, could they overcome the shadows within themselves and the city, or was the darkness an inseparable part of their identity? Elias's hand brushed against Mira's as they walked back toward the precinct, a silent promise forged in the depths of uncertainty. The night had passed, but the shadows both seen and unseen would walk the city streets for a long time yet. And so the city waited, breath held, poised on the cusp of a new dawn. The end was a beginning, but the story of shadows was far from over. The city without shadows' reign had stopped hours ago, leaving the streets slick and gleaming beneath the neon haze that bathed the megacity in its perpetual twilight. From his vantage point atop a crumbling rooftop, Elias Cade surveyed the transformed cityscape. The chaos that had once roiled through these streets, the detached shadows, prowling like malevolent specters, had finally quieted. No longer did silhouettes slip away from their owners to roam the night, committing crimes without bodies to bear the blame. Yet beneath the calm, a suffocating silence lingered, as if the city itself held its breath. The neon glow refracted off puddles, throwing fractured rainbows across the cracked concrete. But the absence of those restless shadows left an emptiness that pressed heavily against Elias's chest. He pulled his trench coat tighter, the familiar weight a small comfort amid the cold. Somewhere deep inside, a shadow of doubt flickered. Was the threat truly over, or merely sleeping? Behind him, the dull thrum of the city's heartbeat persisted. Distant sirens, the soft hum of hovercars, and the faint murmurs of life continuing despite everything. Elias turned away from the edge, descending the stairwell back into the precinct's dim underbelly. Mira Voss was waiting, eyes sharp yet softened with fatigue as she glanced up from a flickering holoscreen. "It's quieter," she said softly, voice barely above the hum of the machines. "But I don't think it's over." Elias nodded, exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. "The Umbra network is dismantled. The shadows have stopped detaching. We won the battle, but at what cost?" Mira met his gaze, her own burden reflected in the depths of her eyes. "You're still here, Elias. That counts for something." They sat in silence, the weight of shared loss settling between them. The precinct around them felt hollow, a temporary sanctuary where the ghosts of what had been still whispered in the shadows. Later that evening, Elias found himself wandering the deserted alleys where his shadow had once roamed free, independent, malicious, a part of him now severed. The flickering holo ads cast fractured light onto cracked concrete, and he knelt to trace the outline of where that shadow had lingered. It was gone, vanished into the ether like so many other lost fragments of the city's tortured soul. A cold breeze stirred the papers at his feet, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he heard the faintest whisper, a sigh carried on the wind. An echo of the shadow's voice that had once betrayed him. He shivered, a haunting emptiness curling in his gut. Back in his sparse apartment, Elias stared into the cracked mirror that hung crooked on a peeling wall. His reflection fractured into shards of light and darkness, the boundary between self and shadow blurred beyond recognition. The years of trauma, betrayal, and loss had left their mark, each crack a testament to battles fought and identities torn asunder. "Who are you now?" he whispered to the fragmented man staring back. The silence answered him, thick and unyielding. Outside, the city pulsed with life, imperfect, scarred, but breathing. The shadows may no longer detach, but their legacy remained etched into the neon veins of the metropolis. Elias knew that beneath the surface, the fragile piece could shatter at any moment. Yet for now, the city stood still, caught between light and darkness, control and chaos. As dawn threatened the horizon, Elias Cade allowed himself a moment of fragile hope. The path ahead was uncertain, the scars deep, but the fight was not yet over, not entirely. Somewhere between self and shadow, loss and redemption, he would find his way. Or he would be lost forever in the dark. The city without shadows held its breath, and so did he.